Eddie's right. You all know Todd Rundgren. Todd started with this band called the Naz way back when. Many classic solo LPs to his credit, and LPs with his later group Utopia. As a producer, it's hard to pick the highlights. There are so many, but they include Cheap Trick, The Band, Grand Funk Railroad, Hall & Oates, Lords of the New Church, the New York Dolls, the Psychedelic Furs, Meatloaf, Jules Shear, Patti Smith, the Tubes.
You're making me tired.
Please welcome Todd Rundgren. We're going to start today.
Bootsy Collins?
Right. Does it say Bootsy there?
No.
We're going to start by asking a question of everybody on the panel, which is just kind of a warm-up, and that is, what artists have you been listening to lately, and what do you like about what they're doing? And
I think before we started the panel, we were all sitting around discussing, like, what is it we've been listening to, and we realized that it's that we don't listen to anything we're not working on most of the time because of the strain it can put on your the sensitive parts of your listening mechanisms. So usually when I listen to records, it's old records or records that I know I'm going to enjoy, or records that are highly recommended to me. When I hear something on the radio, I enjoy, for instance, like new Peter Gabriel and new Steve Winwood, partially because I enjoy listening to them, and partially because I am enjoying the fact that they're getting the recognition that they deserve finally after all these years.
How much do you interact with the musicians in the recording process? Meaning, how much guidance, that could mean, how much guidance do you give to the artists in the process? Todd, you want to start on that one?
Me? Oh. It varies, of course, from act to act how much you have to be involved in their music. The function of a producer, to me, is generally is somebody who just makes up the difference. Especially nowadays, artists come into the studio and they're a little more sophisticated about the whole process than people used to be. There are magazines detailing all the latest equipment and all the techniques that everybody uses, and so a lot of people come in prepared with ideas. So oftentimes you might almost dangerously find yourself relegated to another job like that of engineer. So it really varies sometimes. Some artists are very self-sufficient and don't require a lot of input. Other artists require a lot of hand-holding. My personal preference is to deal with artists who have a pretty good awareness of what's going on, a real confidence about their material and their performance of it, and generally just want an objective ear. And hopefully most of my productions are slanted towards that. If you're able to detect that beforehand, I would always prefer to do an act that has confidence in their material and really just wants some objectivity out of me.
Daniel, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, a couple of things. I tend to get involved with the band with performance. I'll join them banging on various bits of percussion. That's a good way to get to know people. If you're in there playing with them, you learn the arrangements fast. You can share ideas. Everything gets developed early on with your knowledge, and you become a unit. And then on the other side of the glass, well, I check things out to make sure that the sounds are good and are strong, but primarily I like to be involved with the players, either playing guitar or percussion, and I think it just creates a certain bond that stays with you throughout the whole production.
You've also been involved with recording acts in unusual environments. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Okay. In the case of U2, we chose to not record the tracks in a studio. We brought in some portable equipment in some interesting places, one of them being a castle. And needless to say, in a place like that, you have access to endless interesting sounding rooms. So you make discoveries as you go and get excited about a place, and the room or the building becomes part of the spirit of making the record. So it's part of that cohesive spirit as well, discovering interesting sounds together, and I think it's all part of the team spirit that you can create out of an interesting environment. It doesn't mean to say that you can't get good results out of a studio, because a studio does tend to formalize it. You're there to do a job, and you're going to get on with it and get results. But I think my preference is to discover an environment with the band, and then the record takes on a sound because of that place and the people involved.
Thank you. Todd, Eddie, do you have anything?
No, he was talking about recording U2 in a castle. We started doing that kind of thing with Zeppelin years ago when the recording at the Rolling Stones house in England. And this idea of using a castle is not exactly brand new, but at the same time it does give you the ability to create wild sounds. If you want to stick a guitar amplifier in a fireplace, which that's the kind of crazy thing you could do.
Yeah.
Or separate the drums in a glass conservatory and just use a few mics. You can get something really interesting happening. Mm-hmm. And it does the fact that you're in an unusual place that is not your norm. You're not restricted within the confines of a studio, where quite often you have only one set of acoustics to deal with. In a castle or a rented mansion, you can get, maybe 4 or 5 different drum sounds and at least a half a dozen different guitar sounds. Mm-hmm. And, you feel like you're part of the spirit of the place that you're in. It's very challenging. I mean, you can run up against all kinds of crazy things, like bats flying in and out. And
I think that the point that Daniel brought out is also something a lot of people don't realize, particularly somebody who wants to be a producer, and that's the degree to which you have to be a politician. Like your interaction is often non-musical with people. And as you say, sometimes you can form a relationship with the other people, with people who are making the record with you, that helps things along, and then other times it is impossible to satisfy. And like act that I recently did, complained in the press that I didn't invite him to my house enough, and and to me, it's like there are certain political issues that you always have to feel out, as things go along, things that are happening in the band that you don't know about. And that's part of the interaction, things that are non-musical as well. And that if you want to be a producer, you better be prepared to deal with it.
Well, I think also if you're going to be a producer, you better be prepared to be the father confessor, the psychologist, the doctor,
Whipping boy.
Yeah, whipping boy, that too.
How do you guys choose the acts that you work on? That's a question I know a lot of people in the room are anxious to. Bernard, you obviously get reams of requests. How do you choose your projects?
Do you have them? Reams. Let me see.
Let you see them, huh?
Yeah, right. No, what I try to do, especially since being in a disco band and watching the death of our disco music, which seems to sound real familiar to me nowadays, the music they call it's not disco. But I went out and I tried to find bands that sounded different and to get involved in new things, to give me enthusiasm again in the studio. So I try to look for new people that are just starting up, as with Robert or people like that, a Power Station. It was some guys wanting to do something different. And, that's a lot more fun to me in the studio than doing the standard productions with the strings, the horns, and the girls and all of that,
Daniel? Jay, go ahead.
Okay. I started because I was a writer, and Timex Social Club was a group that I put together and did Rumors because no major label would take my record, including Polygram, when I did Rumors.
Wait a minute, I have to defend myself. I wasn't there.
That's
there.
okay, Dick, I know that, but none of the major labels would take any of my records or anything that I had written for anybody. And instead of waiting, I decided to start my own label and sold everything I owned, put out Rumors, sold 1.5 million records, and now they have to deal with me. So basically, what I did was a lot of the young people that started with me when I started, that helped me, basically the artists on my label, the young, energetic black people that I am trying to create a positive image and model for. I live in Sacramento, will continue to live in Sacramento, because we all know that most of the record industry is ruled by crooks, homosexuals, and drug addicts. Something I don't want to be involved in. They should never let me have a mic.
That'll get you in the press.
Now who say it ain't the truth?
That's a tough one.
All right. We're going to switch gears a little bit here. We're going to talk about pre-production, which Todd Rundgren is anxious to talk about.
Pre-production?
Right.
Good deal.
How important?
I wanted to interject something on that last question before we go on.
Oh, all right.
No, it's nothing to do with the record business, but how you choose people to produce you. And we've all discussed this, that we expect, for various, depending on the style of music that you have, as soon as the seminar is over, a wave of cassettes will come flying up towards the front here of people looking for deals. And we all usually get offers from people who already have deals. And for me, one of the prime factors in deciding to do it is that I can do it differently than somebody else can do it, or that I have some special sensibility about it that somebody else can do. If it seems like another producer could do it just as easily as me, there doesn't seem any point in me doing it in the first place. Regardless of how much I like him. It's like somebody like Stevie Winwood. I know Stevie personally. I would love to work on a record with him, but I couldn't possibly do a better job than Russ has done with him. So what's the point of me doing it? Just to kind of like stroke myself and say that I've done the record. So there are other factors aside from just musical factors. There's got to be an overall justification, given that you've got a number of things to choose from. Let me see now. Oh yeah, pre-production. Pre-production, for me, varies according to the act. For instance, I mentioned to my fellows here the XTC album, in which case they don't have a drummer, and they've got a concept that is so kind of ethereal in some ways that you won't know what you're actually doing until you hear it back. Until you actually record something and hear it back. So the pre-production essentially consisted of everybody sitting around with guitars in a room and staring at each other and saying, yeah, we better turn on the tape machine because, we don't know what we're doing here. In other cases, you may go through extensive rehearsals with people trying to minimize the amount of time that you spend in the studio, because even though you hear about albums that take a year, I think ideally, especially from the producer's standpoint, we want albums to go as quickly as possible once we're in the studio. The studio is not necessarily a patently pleasant environment. It's where you work. Nobody wants to spend that much time in the office. So we want the job to go as quickly as possible once we're in the studio. So wherever pre-production can shorten that, I think you want to apply the maximum amount of it.
Yeah. Todd touched on something that I think we should go into from here, which is the song.
The concept.
Yes. The key to any record, besides who sings it and who plays on it, is the song. The question that I would like to pose to the panel is does it require a great song? I mean, today, does it require a great song to have a hit? With today's groove records, if you actually take the song and look at it and take away the technology and the groove, maybe it doesn't have to be that great. Or does it? And if necessary, do you choose outside material for your artists? And I'll open this to anybody who wants to start.
Nobody here produces Lionel Richie, do they?
Nobody. No.
Sometimes.
Unfair to Lionel.
If it's a song, I think there's a difference between the song and a record. If it's a song will be around forever. A record would just be around for the time that record, that kind of sound is in. So I think some records are just trendy, and then you have some people that write songs that will be around and people understand 20 years from now, like the Beatles.
Well, you obviously understood a good sound. You did Lean on Me.
Yeah.
Good song.
Bill Withers left a lot of room for interpretation. He's a great songwriter.
Yeah. I think it's possible to make a record without it, but I don't think any of us would enjoy it. You know, if we didn't think the song was any good, you know. I think there are lots of producers out there who can make themselves listen to music that they don't enjoy, and according to some kind of formula, put together a record that's supposed to be a hit. And often it will be a hit. I mean, to me, that's why Lionel Richie springs to mind. You know, but to me, that's music that's completely eviscerated and calculated to push people's buttons. And if I had to be in the studio listening to it, I would have my fingers in my ears the whole time.
I agree with you. It's like going to a Spielberg movie.
Yeah, that's it. You know, in some cases you just don't want to be manipulated anymore.
Yeah.
You know, you want to feel what you feel, sort of sympathetically with somebody, rather than having them being up here, figuring out what you want to hear and trying to deliver it to you, rather than letting you discover them and decide whether you like them or not.
Well, I happen to agree with Todd on that. I don't like for a band to come to me and expect me to be God and to create 6-hit singles on their album, you know, and then there's maybe one, okay? So I like to hear a good song. Every now and then, as a producer, we all like to have a little fun, you know, which we do, and we can create, and I have been on records that I have created a song out of a groove, you know, from artists who had nothing but an idea, and would look at you and hum, and you're supposed to make a record out of that, you know what I mean? And we all know that you earn your money when you do that, but it is much more fun when you can come in the room and a guy has a good song and you can concentrate on having a good time. You know, it's a much easier job.
Let's use that as a lead-in to discuss these producers' relationships with the record companies that they produce for and with the A&R people that they interface with on a nearly daily basis. This, I know, opens up a Pandora's box here. Todd and Eddie have worked for a million record companies. You want to start?
We'll have to get into my feeling is that if somebody in the record company was willing to take the responsibility of putting their name on the back of the album, then they certainly should do so, and thenceforth live with that, you know, in the same way that the producer and the artist do. The producer and the artist are building their reputation on the contents of the record, not on the way it's marketed. And it's very disheartening for someone who isn't involved in the process and who is ultimately going to walk away from it after it's finished and not have their name on it, come in and try and manipulate it into something that they think will make their job easier. And in some cases, it can be kept to an endurable minimum. In some cases, it can, in my opinion, degrade the ultimate quality of the album and even possibly cause it to be less successful than it would be. A case in point is that is the head of Virgin Records in England, or somebody very high up in Virgin Records in England, decided to remove Dear God from the album because he didn't like little kids singing on records. He thought there was something smarmy or something about it, you know. And subsequently, it's I can't say that that's the sole reason why the XTC album ultimately became as successful as it was, but it was a completely arbitrary decision. It had nothing to do with the musicality of it or whether it belonged on the record. It was somebody's just personal thing, and it ruined the record as far as I'm concerned. I think most of these people here have never seen a record contract, you know, so they don't realize the cut and dried nature of the actual relationship between the artist and the record company. There's hardly any mention of music in it. You know, there's only mentions of product delivery obligations, you know, and what kind of money changes hands and things like that. So there's never, I don't think any record company, you know, is presumptuous enough to say that they know what an artist's potential is when they sign them, and they really sort of occupy the position of kind of Wall Street investors. You know, they go out and look for something that they think might have some potential, and they invest in it. But to a certain degree, that's a gamble that they're taking, and they don't have a right to change that thing to conform to some other. You know, what will most often is they'll have an artist like, say, Van Morrison, who's on the label for a long time and is just Van Morrison. He's never going to be anything but Van Morrison. Unfortunately, music changes and Van Morrison's style of music goes out of style, and the record company, rather than supporting him through that period, will drop him because he won't conform. And I think that that's lame, myself.
Well, just as As an aside, Van Morrison is signed to Polygram, and he has a new album coming out.
Well, he was at Warner Brothers for years. And they stuck by him for a long time until they finally dropped him very, very late in his career. But, I wasn't involved in that. But, it's true. I'm a record producer.
Well, I think everybody knows what a bogus artist is.
Right.
Yeah.
And a bogus artist doesn't necessarily deserve anybody's support.
Right.
But nobody ever considered Van Morrison a bogus artist. But Van Morrison was always an artist of the first water.
Right.
And
Still is. Will always be. Yeah.
And record companies, while they're making lots of money on Van Halen albums and stuff like that, have an obligation to support people who are going to provide the actual bedrock of music in years to come. When the trendy people have come and gone, there are people whose commitment to music is obvious and who ultimately inspire everyone else who follows behind them. And record companies have an obligation to support them.
We wanted to open up the mic in the front of the room here for questions, but before we do that, is there anything anybody else on the panel wants to say before people can line up right in front here? Anything else? It's
Just,
Now about this drug addicts and criminals and stuff.
Just
I have
one-
a question. I guess anyone, for anyone. When you're producing a record, do you think most about pleasing yourself as producer, or the band you're working with, or the public, or what?
I'll just very quickly answer that. I think serving the song comes first, and hopefully that pleases everyone else involved at the same time.
Well, it sounds like that's what you're doing with you too.
That's what we try and do. Serve the music first. Not serve a manager, not serve a record company, not serve an artist, but serve the song.
Okay. Well, considering you're not so idealistic about your music, it's you're serving the band. The band ultimately has to be happy. Maybe nobody will be happy, but you have to be the band has to be happy. You have to be happy second, because the band and you have your names on the record.
Also,
and that follows you around. Everybody else is out of the picture after the record is out.
quite often.
And how come there are no female producers on the panel?
I don't know. There aren't very many female producers.
Haul one up here.
I'll see you next year.
You go find one and haul her up here.
Yeah, exactly.
Nobody's stopping her. Right?
There's just not that many girl producers for some reason. We're not trying to keep them out. There aren't. Not that we know of. I don't know any
Bernadette
myself.
Cooper from Climax is a female producer. Bernadette Cooper, one of the singers with Climax. Lala.
Lala?
Yeah.
I think the reason why is because well, see, I have a theory generally, why women are more likable than men. It's because it's much easier for a man to be obnoxious, and in most cases, and you often have to be obnoxious in the studio. You have to stand up against a lot of people with weird attitudes and say, "Screw you! This is the way it is," stuff like that. And very few women, I think, are willing to do that.
Women do it all the time.
Women are willing to be the asshole. And that's
Right.
maybe there are. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there are lots of women willing to be the asshole. But
Next question.
This is a question directed to Mr. Rundgren and Mr. Lenoir. Are you, as a producer who has also been involved with more experimental and non-commercial kinds of music, for example, your work with Harold Budd and Brian Eno, and for example, your a cappella album that you did a few years ago. Would you be interested in, if an artist came to you with more of a concept kind of an album, a la, say, Tears for Fears, The Hurting, where most of the songs related around one specific kind of concept, whether or not there were singles involved, more related towards a concept, as opposed to just, say, 10 completely separate singles for the record?
I'd say that, personally speaking, that I would have to remain open to just about any ideas that artists would have. We've spoken mostly about song records, but in fact, I've worked on a lot of instrumental records where you don't really have songs. There are melodies, but they are atmospheric and instrumental records. They don't sell like pop albums do, but nonetheless, I think they're important cornerstone pieces of work. If someone had a brilliant idea and it was something off the beaten path, I would owe it to myself and listeners to give it a chance. It doesn't always take a lot of money to make records, so you can do it in a small way with the best quality you can and get on with it.
Well, I find in my particular case, I could be considered like an album producer. I don't produce a lot of singles. It's usually an afterthought in most of the records that I'm involved in. So it always helps for me to figure out some kind of concept. You know, if there is some thread that ties the whole thing together to make the album coherent. I always look, even if there is none present, look for some kind of philosophical thread or something that makes everything seem more coherent.
Thank you very much.
I have a question for you, Todd.
Yeah.
So you can speak some more. And it's about working with XTC.
Yeah.
It was a great record, great group. You're a good producer. I'm sure you both have a lot of fans.
Mm-hmm.
Andy Partridge indicated that he was almost shanghaied into working with you, and then spoke
by Dave Gregory.
Then spoke fairly disparagingly about the working together while praising your vocal work. And I'd like you to, if you'd like to comment or respond to his comments, hear what you have to say, and also maybe if the other people in the panel have something to say about what happens or what can happen when the relationship goes bad in the studio.
This came up before. We never covered this issue. Oftentimes, an artist would prefer to produce himself, but the record company won't allow him. Because they're not doing a good job at it, or because they're inexperienced at it, or something like that. And so the record company will require that they get a producer. And in the case of the XTC album, I was one of the list of producers, and Dave Gregory was a fan, so I got the job. And Andy, I believe, was probably apprehensive the whole time. And their history usually is that they hire a producer, but he is really kind of like creative engineer. You know, he supervises the sound of the record, and very often has very little musical input. And when I got involved in the record, I got involved in it for one reason. I thought the band was dying, and I wanted to extend their longevity, and I wasn't going to let Andy Partridge stop me. And that's essentially what happened and why we're having this little disagreement.
So it's just a battle of the wills.
Yeah. Well, essentially, you know, that was another question we got to. You know, what point does an artist have the right to wreck his own record? And I suppose he does have a right to wreck his own record, you know. But you have to at least stand up for what you believe. You know, you have to at least say, you know, it's your record, you do it the way you want, but this is the way I think it should be. You know, and just put it on the table. You know, that's about it.
My name is Malcolm Rule. I'm an artist and a producer, and I want to direct a question towards Todd. You were talking about the producer's role as being the outside eye and the objectivity. When you're doing a record that you're producing, a solo album, what do you do? Do you have techniques that you use? What do you do to get that objectivity when you are the artist and the producer?
Well, see, when I'm doing a solo album, since I don't need the extra skill that a producer, the difference that the producer would make, because I know how to do those things, I'm not obligated to be objective making my own records. You know,
so you don't.
I'm supposed to be as subjective as possible, because the whole idea of your so-called objectivity and being a producer is, first of all, you're supposed to perceive, you know, the artist in a way that he doesn't even realize himself. You know, what his strengths and weaknesses are, and make him be a really kind of like put himself in focus for everybody. You know, so that they can all see and understand what he's doing. And if I'm doing a solo album, or if, for instance, the artist understands what he's doing enough, you know, it's a subjective thing. He really is supposed to be expressing himself individually. He's not supposed to be trying to be like everybody else or trying to please the producer or anybody else. You know, the only thing the producer is supposed to be doing is keeping them from. The hardest thing for me as a producer is keeping the artist from imitating somebody else. That's the hardest thing, because they all hear records and things that are hits and like sounds that other people use, and they all want to do it. You know, and the point is that that's just an infatuation that they have, and doesn't reflect necessarily the artistic oeuvre that they're carrying around that everybody wants to see. You know?
Thanks.